now the waves are slamming into the deck of the ship, and it's not making it any better for anybody still on board the ship. Hey guys, welcome back to another video, and in today's video we are back with recreating the disasters. Today we're focusing on the SS Atlantic. So yeah guys, let's get into the video. Alright, so here we have the SS Atlantic in front of us, and it is a relatively small ship. It might be the smallest ship we've seen in this series so far. So yeah, Jlkillen, do you want to give us a little bit of background on the SS Atlantic?
Yeah, so the SS Atlantic was an ocean liner of the White Star Line that operated between Liverpool and New York City, and she was built in 1870 by Harland and Wolff in Belfast, becoming one of the 4 Oceanic-class liners. These 4 sister ships were luxurious with a standard not seen with any previous vessels, which included 2 classes of accommodation. On March 20th, 1873, the SS Atlantic departed for her 19th voyage from Liverpool to New York, carrying 952 people on board, which consisted of 835 passengers and 14 stowaways. Alright,
so as you can see, the SS Atlantic is now departing Liverpool. Now, in reality, it's actually Southampton, but this'll do. Now, as we're departing here, we've got this amazing sunset. Look at that. That is pretty awesome. We've got the Atlantic in the foreground, the sunset in the background. Very nice. Now, we are going to have to divert towards Nova Scotia, but for now, we are continuing on towards New York City. Now, if you're wondering why do we have to divert, we'll get into that in a little bit. Now, we are using sails for this voyage, and that is basically to make the ship go faster. However, in reality, they weren't really used during these voyages. Now, why was that, Jlkillen?
Yeah, so I believe that passengers were concerned about the new innovative steam engines breaking down during the voyage, so sails were still present as a backup just in case. Additionally, I do think that the White Star Line added the sails as it would pose a negatively embarrassing view toward the company if any of their ships needed to be towed by another ship from another company.
So yeah, that's really interesting that it was a bit taboo to use sails once these steam engines came out, but it does make sense. Now, at this point, the captain has decided to divert. Now, why was that?
So the captain became concerned that they would run out of fuel before reaching New York, but in fact, they had more than enough remaining coal, but the engineer had been purposefully under-reporting coal reserves to increase the margin of error in favor of safety, which convinced them that they were running short on coal.
That means if they just kept on going to New York, they would have been perfectly fine. No one would have died.
Pretty much, yeah.
Now, not only was diverting to another port a problem, but there was something else going on, and it wasn't really in the control of anybody on the ship. And what was that?
Yeah, so most of the crew had actually never been to Halifax before, so they were oblivious to the dangers of the approach. Nobody took any soundings, posted any masthead lookouts, reduced any speed, or woke the captain as they approached the coast. They weren't able to locate or spot the Sambro Lighthouse, which warns nearby vessels of the shallow rocky shoals to the west of the harbor's entrance. The helmsman was the only crew member who was familiar with the Halifax coast, and grew concerned that something was wrong. After relaying his concerns to the officers on duty, he was ultimately ignored.
Now, this would basically seal the fate of the Atlantic, since no one was doing anything, and the only person that knew something was wrong was being ignored. The ship was bound to run into the shore. And it did.
Yeah, so after the rocky coast was spotted, an order was given to turn hard to starboard and to reverse the engines. At around 3 a.m. on April 1st, 1873, the Atlantic struck an underwater rock known as Golden Rule Rock.
Now, this collision was so violent that the air inside the ship actually shifted forward. It basically kept moving with the momentum of the ship and snuffed out all of the oil lamps, basically making the ship go into a blackout. Now, unfortunately, as a result of many different factors, this was not the last thing that would happen. It wasn't just this forward end collision. So what started happening next?
Yeah, so eventually the wind, waves, and the current pushed the Atlantic stern towards the rocky shore, and that actually caused all of the propeller's blades to shear off after it made contact, as the engines were still in reverse in hopes of reversing the ship off of Golden Rule Rock.
Yeah, now the waves are slamming into the deck of the ship, and it's not making it any better for anybody still on board the ship. And you can see, at this point, there is no chance that you're going to be standing on that deck. Now people are starting to climb over the superstructure, people are actually climbing onto the masts. It is a mess, and there are people still trapped below inside the ship.
Eventually, the ship partially rolls and capsizes, and it actually caused the stern to flood rapidly, which basically killed nearly all of the single women and children that were in their cabins in the stern.
Now you've got to think that the ship sank so quickly that getting out of the ship was a challenge in and of itself. It wasn't like walking out of your cabin and going to the nearest exit. The ship was rolling, the hallways were crowded and dark, as we mentioned, the lights went out, and now the ship is completely rolled on her side, and this is how she would look, basically completely wrecked. She wouldn't really sink any further than this. Obviously in game we're going to see it sink further, that's just because of where we are, but the bow would also break off, and there's a very interesting photo, and I'll put it up on screen, of the wreck during daybreak, and it is really sad to see because lots of people died. Most of the people on board the ship did not survive.
Yeah, so there were actually trapped families in the midsection of the ship. They tried to pound and open the windows and portholes for help from the passengers who were clinging to the hull, but the waves made the attempts to open the windows futile.
And you can imagine, even if they did get those windows open, water was coming right over the hull of the ship and just began flooding those sections anyways. Now, the lifeboats, you may think, okay, lower a lifeboat, get away. That did not work out so well, and once again, Jlkillen, you can explain this, you know more than I do.
Yeah, so all 10 of the lifeboats were lowered by the crew, but they were all quickly washed away or smashed into the ship by the violent waves.
So yeah, if you're trying to escape in any of these lifeboats, well, I don't think it's gonna go well for you, because most of the people, actually, I think all the people, died in those lifeboats, right?
I believe so, because if anything, I think all of them were, like I said, washed away, or they were smashed violently against the side of the ship because of the waves.
Now, amongst all of this tragedy, there was miraculous stories of survival. So, Jlkillen, do you want to explain what this was?
Yeah, so some survivors that were clinging to the side of the hull, they were able to open portholes on the starboard bow, which allowed around 100 passengers access to an escape route. An 11-year-old boy was actually pulled through one of these portholes, and unfortunately, he would be the only surviving child out of all the passengers.
Now, the island that the Atlantic crashed into, while being small, was inhabited, and what happened with them?
Yeah, so the only resident living on the island with their family arrived at the scene of the Atlantic. Fishermen eventually began to arrive from the area to begin rescuing the men from the rock. Nearly 400 survivors are rescued. Out of the 952 passengers on board, 550 were lost. Only one child actually survived, and every woman was lost. And the sinking of the SS Atlantic would actually be the worst disaster for the White Star Line until the sinking of the Titanic in 1912, several decades later.
So that is it. That was the disaster of the SS Atlantic. If you guys have enjoyed this, make sure you leave a like and a comment, and I'll send you some guys. Goodbye.